Well, and listening to this podcast. So maybe this is a good time to kind of define some of these things that we're talking about. And so, maybe we could just start with, with the human person. I mean, why does any of this matter anyway? A child of God is an identity that the Catholic Church offers. I would think that maybe it starts there, but help us understand, why are you so passionate about identity and who man is? We have an episode that came out just before yours called Who Man Is. And so we talked a little bit about it, but, how would you define it?
So here's the thing. Every person has it built into them to figure out who am I? And it's a task, particularly in adolescence. Now, the culture used to take certain things off the table. We didn't question whether we were male or female. So when I was growing up, the question of who am I was, how am I alike or different from my siblings? How am I going to imagine my life and how I live out my talents and God's call in a way that's similar to or different from my parents or people I admire? So it's working out your future, but it was rooted in a truth that we already knew. Right? You knew where you came from, and you knew the truth about being created by God, male or female. But what's happening today is people have that very same yearning, because you have to figure out who you are in order to be able to answer the other key questions.
But without the certainty.
Without the certainty, it's completely destabilized. So if you don't know who you are, you can't answer the question of, what's the meaning of my life? How should I live? Because all of that flows from understanding who you are. So when the culture says everything's up for grabs, you get to self-define who you are because we're throwing God out. There is no creator. You are a self-creator. You define for yourself. It makes things very unstable. And so, not surprisingly, we're seeing kids being very destabilized by this.
I would think that, we've talked about relativism on this show before, and this idea that we kind of make our own truth. Historically, that was, I would think more in the philosophical realm. But, Pope Benedict talked about the dictatorship of relativism. It was like, we all make our own truth, but you need to go along with mine.
Right.
But that's almost like it's expanded and gone beyond philosophy at this point, to where even the physical nature of things, of our bodies, has been called into question. Like everything's up for grabs. Right. Is that where that starts? I mean, what?
It really goes back to the rejection of God, and that's something that Pope Benedict spoke about. He said, when you reject the Maker, you will also lose sight of the image of God in man. And the dignity of the person will no longer be respected. And that's what we're seeing. So you might wonder, as you hear the stories in the media about people undergoing all these gender transition procedures, right? They have a healthy body to start with, and all of a sudden they're getting their breasts cut off and their ovaries removed, and on and on. And you think, why would someone do that? It's degrading. It harms the human person. But if you no longer have a vision of what it means to be a human, the fact that we receive our identity as male or female as a gift from God, and you think, oh, this is all up to me, I get to decide anything. We become sort of like Adam and Eve back in the garden, thinking we can be like God. We can write our own future, write our own destiny. But it's a rejection of God, and a rejection of the idea that we're called to eternal life. There's a purpose to our body. There's a purpose to creation. When you throw all of that out and it's all up for grabs, well, you can decide how to live, how to redesign yourself. There's no guarantee of good results, and in fact, the results are not good.
It sounds to me like you are on the front lines of helping to rebuild or completely replace this fallen culture with the authentic truth, goodness, and beauty of what it actually means to be a human person. Because so many people, I feel like they have been sucked in by this social media technological revolution in a way that they didn't mean to. They didn't know.
Right.
You couldn't have foreseen all of the things that would be offered to us at the click of a button that can utterly transform your worldview and isolate you from your own family and your own culture and your own faith, to where you don't have a faith, you don't have a culture, you don't have a family, and you feel in a void.
I think to speak to that too, just in my personal experience and knowing people who struggle with these things, that is one of the first things that I notice is that the first thing that goes wrong is that now they're completely detached from their family. Even on this issue. So they could even have a faithful Christian family, but they definitely have drawn a line in the sand, and there is a detachment first before any of the other stuff. I would say even the dysphoria and stuff and just from experience that I've seen, is there is a complete cutoff from their family, everything that they were raised to believe, everything that their family says at this point is wrong. So I know we've been talking a lot about family, but can you kind of speak to that and maybe it is the internet or whatever's driving that engine?
No, I think it's a really good observation, and I think one of the things that I've found in working on this issue for a while and knowing many families who've either people personally who've gone through this kind of identity issue, or they love someone who has gone through it or is going through it, is that oftentimes people do not see that gender ideology is utterly incompatible with Christian anthropology, the vision of the person. It's two completely different visions of the person, but they don't see that at the outset.
One thing I wanted to say before one thing I learned from you is that gender ideology, you first heard that from Pope Francis. Is that
he was
right?
the one who sort
of
popularized it.
Okay. Oh, so it was in a document. That was something that as I was researching,
he recognized the trend that was taking place and named it.
Yes, Pope Benedict also spoke of sort of the theory of gender. So it was on the radar because in Europe there was a lot more sort of action around that before it came over to the U.S. But the U.S. is now the major purveyor of just pushing it through the culture into these other cultures. But in terms of family, I think people oftentimes don't realize that this is such a harmful path and that it's completely incompatible with Christian anthropology because it involves a rejection of the Creator. They're not deliberately saying, I'm going to reject God, but that's where you end up. That's where you end up.